रोमिल भाई,
हाँ,
रोमिल भाई स्टार्ट भाई.
okay. Good evening to all. Now welcome today's speaker, CA Salibhadra Shah and CA Hardik Khatri, Deputy Convener CA BK Chavda ji, Deputy Convener CA Chintan Thakkar, and all the participants in the 34th 32nd Gandhinagar Physical Meeting for 2022 on the topic of 80GGAA of the Income Tax Act. Now I request CA BK Chavda sir for the introduction for the opening remarks of today's seminar.
Thank you રોમિલ ભાઈ.
બીકે ચાવડાની જગ્યાએ હું કરવાનો છું introduction.
Introduction બાકી opening remarks.
હા. This is just opening remark, જાડેજા જી. લદ્દા જી, nice to see you. Very time. Yes. All welcome to all and each and all the members of our CP study circle, and especially Salibhadra Shah sir. And the topic is on the one hand it is a single line topic, but it is itself an ocean. And the topic is if we have understood it properly, we can get the maximum benefit of it. And Salibhadra Shah is going to deal with the same. And Shah sir, under this tight schedule also, sir, the very good number of chartered accountants are present to listen you, sir. So again, sir, nice to see you here, and all the participants. I welcome you all, and just make it over to Romil for furtherance of the schedule.
Now I request CA Narendra C. Jadeja for the introduction of today's faculty.
Good evening all. Salibhadra Shah is a senior manager with tax and regulatory service practice in Ahmedabad office of ENY LLP. He has over 11 years of experience in advising client on direct taxation, both corporate and indirect international taxes, transfer pricing and regulatory issues. Salibhadra specializes on transfer pricing advisory, planning and litigation. He has been advising large clients on their transfer price aspect. He also specializes in appearing before the tax authorities for client audits, both scrutiny as well as transfer pricing. Salibhadra has assisted many companies in their tax and transfer pricing compliances. He also specializes in expatriate taxation and advise expatriate of many companies who have come to India for many employment purposes, both from tax and visa perspectives. Salibhadra is regularly appearing before appellate authority at various levels. Hardik Nilesh Khatri. Hardik Khatri is a senior consultant, work in tax and regulatory practice at EY Ahmedabad. Hardik has 5 years professional experience in the field of taxation. Hardik has secured all India 23rd rank in IPCC and all India 50th rank in CA final. Hardik has worked on international taxation assignment, including indirect transfer, determination of PE exposure, etc. Hardik has also worked on advising client on restructuring proposal involving implications under Income Tax Act, Indian Stamp Act, relevant state act and Foreign Exchange Management Act. Is the introduction of both faculty.
Thank you, Narendra ji. Now, not taking much of time, I hand over online virtual platform to the today's faculty, CA Salibhadra Shah sir and CA Hardik Khatri.
Thank you, Chavda Sahib. Thank you, Romil bhai. Thank you, Narendra bhai. Thank you for providing this opportunity once again to take a small session on 80JJAA. I'll just share my screen. Chavda Sahib, host is disabled participant.
1 minute, sir.
Sure.
Yeah. Just I am allowing 1 minute. It's done, sir.
Just let me know once you are able to see the screen.
Okay,
Yes.
sir. It is
Okay.
available.
Okay. So basically, as Chawda sir mentioned in the initial remarks, while this section is just one section but has a ocean in it, completely agree that there are multiple issues in this section, and that is the reason this one section can also take up an entire session. So just to start, basically, you will all agree that employment generation has always been a primary objective of all the economies. Darek government ne employment generation ni chinta hoy chhe, and so each of the government takes several measures to increase the employment opportunities in the country. And for one of such measure taken by government is providing the deduction under 80JJAA of the Act. While the government came up with the concessional tax regime, that is section 115BAA and 115BAB of the Act, where they have lowered the corporate tax rates and taken away the exemptions, deductions, benefits, they have still continued with giving the deduction under 80JJAA of the Act. It still remains available. So while the government has been making the efforts for simplifying the laws, reducing the tax rates, taking away the deductions, etc., they are still continuing giving the benefit of 80JJAA of the Act. And hence this section becomes very important, especially for us while we all are into the practice, advising our clients, because this is a very important deduction that is given by the CBDT or government, and giving this benefit to the client will always help him, because he can get a very good amount of deduction under this section, and which is not by making any separate additional investment, it is just getting a deduction of the salary expenditure which the client has incurred. પણ જે પ્રમાણે આપણે શરૂઆત કરી કે this is a very half-heartedly drafted section, and this has very many conditions, and each of the conditions are subject to different interpretations, and so therefore we have made an attempt and jotted down certain issues where we will provide our thoughts, what is the arguments, and how the practice is prevailing in the industry. So I'll start with the very brief overview of the section. What this section says, where the gross total income of an SSE to whom section 44AB applies. It is very mandatory that this section is applicable only to those SSE who are liable to tax audit. Includes any profits and gains from business. Profits and gains from the business, there shall be, subject to the conditions specified in subsection 2, be allowed an amount of equal to the 30% of additional employee cost incurred in the course of such business in the previous year for 3 assessment years. You will get a deduction of 30% of your additional employees for 3 assessment years if you fulfill the conditions. Now coming to the coming to subsection 2. So what subsection 2 says? No deduction shall be allowed under subsection 1 of 80JJAA if the business is formed by splitting up or reconstruction of an existing business. However, there is a proviso which states that if the business is formed as a result of some re-establishment, reconstruction, or revival of an existing business, in the circumstances with the period specified in section 33B. 33B basically talks about the rehabilitation allowance, where some company has gone under the rehabilitation and the time limit which is provided is 3 years over there. So that specific to that exception, if the company is formed on account of splitting up or reconstruction, you will not get the benefit. Clause B says, if the business of the SSE is acquired by way of transfer from other person or as a result of business reorganization. When there is a transfer from one person, again this section will not be applicable. And third, which is the most important, you will get this deduction, you will not get this deduction unless the SSE furnishes the report of the accountant as defined in the explanation below subsection 2 of 288, basically a chartered accountant's report before the due date specified under before the due date referred to in section 44AB, and giving the particulars in the report. So basically it talks about that for claiming this deduction, you will need to file a form which is form number 10DA. And the time limit that is provided is you will need to file 1 month before filing of the return. And you will give the prescribed particulars in the form, and this form will basically determine the amount that is eligible for deduction under 80JJAA, and that much amount you will claim in the return of income. Now going into the explanation which is provided under this. So here they have defined what is additional employee cost, what is additional employees, etc. So what they are saying, additional employee cost means total emoluments paid or payable to additional employees and that are employed during the year. Proviso says that in case of an existing business, additional employee cost will be nil if there is no increase in the number of employees from total number of employees employed on the last day of previous year. So for example, the opening number of employees is, let's say, 100. During the year you employ another 100 employees, and another 150 employees already leave the organization. So the closing number of employees only become 50. So opening was 100, closing is 50. So what they say, there is no new increase on the last day of previous year compared to the previous year. So there is no additional employee cost. Second condition is, emoluments are paid otherwise than account pay check. So it is very mandatory that any payment to this to the employees has to be by way of an account pay check or electronic clearing system. Cash, basically cash salary or cash payment will not be accepted. And one proviso good that they have inserted over here is that in case of first year of the business, as I mentioned in clause A, there has to be an opening and closing. Let's say if it's a first year of business, तो પછી મારું opening કશું હોય જ નહીં. So there they have mentioned that in case of first year of new business, emoluments paid or payable to the employees employed in the previous year shall be deemed to be an additional employee cost. You know, during the year jene employ karis, and if my other conditions are fulfilled, then the emoluments paid to those employees will be considered as additional employee cost. Now, who is an additional employee? So additional employee means an employee who is employed during the previous year and whose employment has the effect of increasing the total number of employees employed by the employer as on the last day of the previous year. Basically, as an employer, somebody employs a person, and that leads to increase in the total number of employees on the last day of the previous year, that is 31st March. However, this will not include additional employee ma kone nahi include thai an employee whose total emoluments are more than 25,000. So let's say I employ a person whose salary is more than 25,000 per month, then that person will not be an additional employee for the purpose of deduction under 80JJAA. Second, an employee whose entire contribution is paid by the government under the employee pension scheme in accordance with the employees provident fund. Let's say a person is getting some pension and that pension is also paid by the government, then that person will not be considered as an additional employee. Third condition is that employee has to be compulsorily employed with the employer for more than 240 days in the previous year. So the cutoff comes to, જેમ કે આપણે residential status માં resident non-resident માટે આપણે 2nd October ને લઈએ છે 182 days નો criteria. Similarly, the here it is 240 days, and so the cutoff comes at 4th August. That person should have been employed with me prior to 4th of August. જો 4th of August થી પછી આવ્યો હોય તો that number is less than 240 days during the previous year. An employee has to compulsorily participate in the provident fund. If that employee does not participate in contributing to the provident fund, then that employee will not be considered as an additional employee. For this 240 days, especially for manufacturing of apparel, footwear and leather products, at 3 products mate, the condition of 240 days has been reduced to 150 days. If the person or an employer employs an employee under these 3 industries, it is 150 days. For any other industry or any other service sector, it is 240 days. Second proviso is also very important and a very good proviso. હું પહેલા વાંચું. provided further that where an employee is employed during the previous year for a period of less than 240 days or 150 days, as the case may be, he's been employed after 4th of August, but is employed for a period of 240 or 150 days, as the case may be, in the immediately succeeding year. That employee continues with me in the next year, year 2. Then he shall be said to be employed in the succeeding year, and the provisions of this section shall apply accordingly. What they say, I employ a person after 4th of August. So year 1, that employee is not an additional employee for me, but in the subsequent year also he has completely remained with me. So that person will be called an additional employee in year 2. And if the other conditions get fulfilled, I will get the benefit of that person in year 2, 3 and 4, because that person became the additional employee in year 2. So એના expenditure નો ફાયદો મને 2, 3 અને 4 એમ કરીને 3 વર્ષમાં મળશે. Emoluments means any sum paid or payable to an employee in lieu of his employment, but will not include any contribution that is paid or payable by the employer to any pension fund or provident fund. Basically, our any contribution that we make to the pension fund or provision fund, and any lump sum payment that is made on account of termination of the service or superannuation, voluntary or gratuity, etc. And ultimately, this section was quite liberalized from Finance Act 2016, and that was applicable from the assessment year that commenced on 1st day of April 2016. So basically, assessment year 17-18. This entire section of approximately 2 pages I have tried and break down in the in this table and in 1 page basically. So who is the qualifying taxpayer jene ano benefit મળશે? So the taxpayer has to be a person deriving a profit and gains from business and should be liable to get his accounts audited under 44AB, liable to tax audit. Second is the formative condition. So the business should not be formed by any splitting up or reconstruction of existing business and transfer of any business as a result of any business reorganization. So if this condition gets fulfilled, you will not be eligible. So if these conditions are not there, if there is no splitting up, no reconstruction, no transfer, no business reorganization, you will be eligible. What are the qualifying conditions for an employee? ઉપરની employer માટેથી હવે employee. Additional employees should be employed during the previous year, and that should lead to increase in number of employees compared to previous year. Opening so closing has to be more than 100. Additional employee the total emoluments paid should not be more than 25,000 per month. એટલે જો એનો પગાર 26,000 હોય તો એ એલિજિબલ નહીં રહે ATJJAA માટે. આપણે એને એક્સક્લુડ કરવો પડશે. It also excludes the employees from whom the employer contribution to pension fund under EPF are borne by the government, and it also excludes those employees who do not contribute to PF. Minimum tenure, employment tenure is 240 days and 150 days for apparel, footwear and leather industry. New employees which do not complete 240 days in year 1, but they complete 240 days in year 2, then they will be treated as new employee of year 2, and we can claim the benefit of those new employees in 2, 3 and 4. So despite આ વર્ષે હું એક વર્ષ હું એમ્પ્લોય કરી લઉં પણ આ વર્ષે ફૂલફિલ ના કરે તો હું એ લોકોનો લાભ સેકન્ડ, થર્ડ અને ફોર્થ યર માં લઈ શકું છું. Minimum number of additional employees. So there is no minimum threshold that is prescribed. Even if there is one increase in the employee, I will qualify to claim the deduction under ATJJAA. So there is no minimum threshold. Opening is 100, closing is 101. I am eligible for one employee. What is the definition of emoluments? It includes any sum paid or payable to the employee in lieu of his employment, but will not include any statutory contributions and any lump sum terminal payment like gratuity. And what is ultimately the quantum of deduction? Then it is 30% of additional employee cost, and it is to be spread over 3 years. Basically, this is the legislative history of ATJJAA. So Finance Act 1998, there was a provision, then certain changes were made in 13-15, and ultimately in 2016, the current provision which is there, that came in Finance Act 2016, and ultimately Finance Act 16 was the year where this provision was highly liberalized. If you see ATJJAA from 98 perspective, then what was the quantum of deduction? So the quantum of deduction was 30% of additional wages paid to new and regular workmen. This was there in 13-15, and now they have changed to, from 16 they have changed to 30% of additional employee cost. What was the activity test? So activity test under 98 was that the gross profit has to be derived from an industrial undertaking, and that industrial undertaking was supposed to be engaged in manufacturing of article or thing. Service industry ne apta જ નહોતા. Finance Act 13, industrial undertaking was only changed to manufacturing of goods from factory. 15, it gave to all manufacturing operations, and ultimately in Finance Act 16 they have liberalized, and any taxpayer to whom tax audit becomes applicable and derives profit from the business. So હવે મારી બહુ condition liberalized. I don't need to be a manufacturing, I don't need to have an industrial undertaking. Any taxpayer, tax audit applicable and into the business. Formative condition was industrial undertaking should not be formed by splitting up and reconstruction. Here it has brought down to business. So business should not be formed by splitting up of reconstruction, and slightly an additional condition that has been added is that there should not be any transfer as a result of any business or reorganization. Remuneration માટે પહેલા કોઈ test નહોતો, but now they have brought down this test, and maximum remuneration you can pay to employees only 25,000 per month. And secondly, government subsidized test, there you will not be eligible for deduction if your contribution towards pension is made by the government. Next is regular workman test. Basically, regular workmen, it was saying that it excluded all casual and contractual workmen. In 1990, it was said that they have to be there. You cannot include your casual or contractual workmen. They have changed this language in Finance Act 16 to all the types of employees. If you fulfill the condition of employer-employee relationship, you fulfill. The very good change that was brought in is the threshold on number of workers or number of workmen or employees. Finance Act 98 said that it has to be more than 100, then only you become eligible. It was reduced to 15. From Finance Act 16, there is no such threshold. Even one increase in employee, you are eligible. Threshold in the number of days, which I mentioned, now the days have been 240 in case of any industry and 150 in case of apparel, leather or footwear. Earlier it was minimum 300 days. And secondly, the workforce test was the workmen should have been employed, either the increase in the number of workmen should be more than 10% of the existing number of employees on the last day of previous year. જો મારી પાસે 100 employees હોય on the last day of the preceding year, તો મારું increase has to be at least more than 10% of 100. એટલે મને હું કદાચ 105 લોકો લઉં ને તો મને બેનિફિટ ના મળે, કારણ કે મેં 10% ની કન્ડિશન ફૂલફિલ નથી કરી. એ મારે મિનિમમ 10% થી વધારે લેવા પડે. This condition was also removed. Now only even one employee you are eligible. And secondly, even in the first year of business you are eligible. Mode of payment, it was earlier there was no such condition. Now it is only account pay check, draft or ECS. Now from Finance Act 2016, the emoluments have been defined, and there is also compulsion to have the audit report. Earlier the emoluments were not defined, but audit report was always compulsory. Audit report I meant basically the tax audit report. Very quickly on this section 80JJAA, the act I tried explaining it on the tabular form and the going to the legislative history. There have been multiple issues that have come up while we practically go and deal into the situation, and while we practically go and compute the deduction available to the any SSE. So we have tried to cover few of the issues in the subsequent slides. So for each of the issue, I'm requesting my colleague Hardik, he will take up one by one each of the issue, and then anywhere I will also give my thoughts. So he will take up one by one each of the issues. And I would request if anybody has any questions, immediately you can ask us, because each of the issue there are multiple views, view 1, view 2, and what is the better view or the prevailing view in the market. So we have also tried to split the questions in each of the same. So anyone has any other thoughts, any arguments we have not covered, feel free to tell upfront so that we can also take those and discuss those.
So thank you, Shalibhadra, for taking us through this provision line by line. And now we'll go through some issues, some practical nuances which we can see while applying this 80JJAA provisions. So let's start with the first practical issue which is being faced. So the first issue which is which needs to be considered while applying this provision is to determine whether this deduction can be claimed qua entity, that is taxpayer as a whole, or it is to be claimed qua business, that is separately for each business undertaking. So I'll give you just one simple example. So let's say there is an entity X having two business undertakings. The first business undertaking is into, say, manufacturing of garments, and there is a other business undertaking which is into, say, manufacturing of chemicals. Now the issue is whether the deduction can be claimed qua entity X Limited as a whole or qua businesses. For that is for chemical industry independently and independently for garment undertaking. Why this issue is relevant, I'll just give you an example. So let's say the opening number of employees was 100 and the closing number of employees qua entity is, let's say, 90. But if you see qua undertaking, so chemical industry का opening था, let's say 80 employees, उसमें add हुआ 10 employees and employees left was 5. So उसका closing हो गया 85. And now let's say garment industries opening was 20 minus, let's say, 5 employees left and additions were, let's say, 2. So one undertaking may independently qualify for deduction, other undertaking may not qualify for deduction, whereas overall entity itself may not qualify as deduction. So basically we have dealt this issue in two views. So view one is that the deduction has to be claimed qua entity. Why? What are the arguments in favor of this view? So first argument is that intention of the section is to provide incentives to entities generating employment. So it is not qua business undertaking that this section has been introduced. This section has been introduced for entity as a whole. The section provides deduction from gross total income. It is not saying anywhere that that deduction is to be claimed from GTI of a business unit. Now there is another test which is to be applied, is that 44AB tax audit should be applicable. Now this limit can be tested only for entity as a whole. It cannot be tested for a business unit. And by taking this alternate view that it is applied for business separately, taxpayer may try to manipulate deduction by employing more employees in a particular business segment, and he may not employ some employees in other business segment for claiming this deduction. Now, arguments in favor of view that business independently may qualify as deduction is that, see, there are various, so there are many provisions which highlights that deduction is to be claimed qua business. I'll just change my slides and take you through those provisions. Now, if you see the subsection 1, it says that the deduction where the gross total income of assessee to whom 44AB applies includes profits and gains derived from business. Here, business is what business is being referred. Now, if you come down, it says that amount equal to 30% of additional employee cost incurred in the course of such business in previous year. So it says that for a particular business, you can claim deduction. Now, if you even come down to subsection 2, it says if the business is formed by splitting up of or reconstruction, if the business is acquired by the assessee. So one business may be acquired by assessee. Let's say in our example, garment business was acquired from someone else. The chemical business was in-house developed by the assessee. So there are various provisions which supports that this deduction can be claimed qua business and not qua entity. Now, the example which I give, that it would be unfair to restrict deduction of existing qualifying business where the entity acquires a new business from other person. So let's say the garment industry was acquired from someone else. Now I cannot deny deduction to entity as a whole. I can deny deduction that garment business was acquired. It does not fulfill the test of splitting up and reconstruction. So please deny deduction of garment industry, garment business. How can you deny deduction of my in-house business which I have developed just because I acquired some other business? Now, even if you see the scheme of chapter 6, ATIA, IB, the deduction is provided qua profits of the entity. Now this provision is placed under chapter 6A part C. So it is very much arguable that this section this deduction is also available qua business and not qua entity. And the last argument which can be done is that so long as each identity of the business can be maintained separately. So let's say I have maintained separate books of account. I have maintained some some sort of distinction. Let's say cost centers are different in my SEP, that the expenditure for my garment business and for my chemical business are being recorded separately. I'm providing segmental financial statements for separately for my garment business, for my chemical business. So long as I'm maintaining distinct identity for each of my business, the deduction should be computed for each business. So now what is the preferred view for this specific issue? So we believe that specifically view 2, that business the deduction is to be computed qua business may be considered as a preferred view, because the section itself is drafted in a manner that it provides deduction for a particular business, and that's why view 2 can be considered as a preferred view. Now when you apply view 2, there are some implications which needs to be considered. The first implication is that the formative conditions has to be tested qua business. So the example which I give, when garment business is acquired, in that case you cannot claim deduction for garment business, but you can claim deduction of your chemical business because it was your in-house business. It is possible that some business may qualify, some business may not qualify, and the increase in number of employees, that criteria where that needs to be increase in employee has to be seen qua business and not qua entity as a whole.
Just one important point to add over here is which is already mentioned in view number 2, first bullet. It is very unfair to restrict the deduction to an existing qualifying business in case the new entity acquires a new business. So let's say I have already established business where each year I qualify and I claim the deduction, but due to acquisition of a small or a separate business, I entirely lose my right to claim the deduction. Now that cannot be ultimately the intention also. So while for the new business which I acquired, you deny, but for my existing, for which I am already eligible, I should not be denied. So the preferred view and the view which practically also we have seen and in the experience, that it is always to be determined qua each business. You have to determine, check each business, consider each business separately and compute the deduction.
Right. So now let's go to the issue number 2. Let's determine the scope of the term business reorganization. I'll just make you through go through the provision so that we can understand what is being what is being analyzed here. So if you can see my screen, subsection 2 says that no deduction under subsection 1 shall be allowed. Please refer to subclause B here. If the business is acquired by assessee by way of transfer from any other person or as a result of business reorganization. So what is the scope of the term business reorganization is being dealt presently. So business reorganization per se would not include only cases of amalgamation, demerger, acquisition of business through some slum sale, but it may also include some cases like capital restructuring, alteration of rights and interest of security holders, conversion of status, let's say entities being converted from LLP to company. All such things may be covered under the scope of business reorganization. And once it qualifies as business reorganization, deduction under section 80JJAA for that particular undertaking may be denied because of business reorganization. So let us take some few examples and let us try to determine the scope of business reorganization. So consider scenario A. Yeah, taxpayer starts a new business with new assets and it recruits new employees independently. Yeah, so then we can claim deduction under section 80JJAA. Simple example, no dilemma in that. Come to case scenario B. Taxpayer starts business by acquiring a running business from another entity through amalgamation, demerger, slum sale. In that case, we cannot claim deduction under section 80JJAA. What about new employees recruited post acquisition of that undertaking? So let's say I acquired business of company X. At that point of time, I have say 100 employees. From the next year, let's say I employ 20 more employees in that specific undertaking. Can I say that I am eligible for claiming deduction of that 20 additional employees? So ideally, when business does not satisfy formative condition in year 1, it automatically gets disqualified in subsequent years, because you are formed by splitting up and reconstruction. You are not eligible in year 1 itself. How can you say that you can claim deduction for additional employees in second year? But you may place some arguments like the section was introduced for generation of employment, and that's why the deduction may be claimed for additional employee, but practically it may be subject to litigation. Preferred you did that if business is disqualified in year 1, you may not claim deduction in subsequent year, even if there is increase in number of employees. Now come to case study C. Taxpayer has a running business and acquires additional business from another entity. Now I have acquired a business from an entity, let's say Y Limited slum sell its business to X Limited. Now in that case, like the example which I give, let's say I acquired the business of garment from Y Limited. So my existing business is chemical and I acquired the garment business. So whether I can claim deduction? Yes. So for existing business, I can claim deduction under 80JJAA. New business will not qualify because it comes under the scope of business reorganization. Now let's say there is a separate case. Let's say I acquire same business from Y Limited. So I'm in chemical business. I acquire assets and liabilities pertaining to chemical business from Y Limited. Now, in case of same business, can I claim this deduction? In that case, practically, if the blended business substantially represents new business. So let's say my existing capacity is 100 tons. Post acquisition, my capacity is, let's say, 200 tons. So more or less the business, the blended business is 50-50, which more or less represents the new business. So in that case, it will be very difficult to claim deduction under section 80JJAA because you are acquiring same business. There is no distinction in the business which is being acquired, and therefore it will be difficult to identify the that you cannot segregate the business. So it will be very difficult to claim deduction for the same business which is being acquired. Now come to case study C, where the taxpayer is disqualified in C above, but subsequently expands his business to the extent that identity of old business is obliterated. So let's say my capacity was 100 tons, but after that I substantially expand my business such that my capacity now becomes 200 tons. So whether I can claim deduction? You may claim deduction, but it may be subject to it may be subject to litigation, because ultimately what they'll say is it is the same business which is being acquired, and you are expanding that business, but it more or less represents the same business. But practically you may claim deduction. However, risk of litigation cannot be ruled out. And consider a scenario where company is converted into LLP or vice versa. So whether it can be said as a business reorganization, and can you claim deduction in that case? I would say arguably yes, you can claim deduction, because practically you haven't acquired any new business. It's just that there is a change in constitution. And in this regard, reference may be made to the judgment of Advanced Valves Global, Delhi ITT's judgment. In that case, a proprietary concern was converted into partnership firm, and the taxpayer claimed deduction under section 80 IB. The tax authority sought to deny deduction on the ground that business was formed by split or reconstruction of existing business. However, ITT ruled that there was neither splitting up or reconstruction. It was merely reconstitution of the same concern, and that's why the partnership firm was allowed 80 IB deduction. Taking a reference from this judgment, the conversion of company into LLP is mere reconstitution of the firm or company, and therefore deduction may be allowed.
Next question is very important for all of us, and I am sure we all would love it. basically whether the professionals like chartered accountants, company secretaries, or advocates who are liable to tax audit, can they claim deduction under 80JJAA? આમાં કંઈક આપણા views, I would like to hear from you first and then we can go ahead. I would go ahead. ચાવડા સાહેબ, ચિંતન. Okay, so I'll just go to the next slide. So basically what it says that whether the professionals can claim deduction under 80JJAA of the Act. So again, I was split it between the two, okay, whether a professional who is liable to tax audit can claim deduction, and the arguments in the favor that this deduction is available is 80JJAA does not apply to any specific business as it was in the earlier act prior to Finance Act 16, where it was very categorically mentioned that it is applicable to industrial undertaking, applicable to manufacturing. Now it only says that it is business. Second argument is that profession, business always used to include profession, business includes professional, and ultimately this deduction per se is for the purposes of employment generation and to incentivize the employment generation. So why a professional should also be denied the claim of this deduction if that professional has also employed new persons? Coming to arguments under view 2, so there's a Supreme Court judgment in the case of GK Choksi and Company for in the context of section 32(4), which was in the purposes of initial depreciation. So there it was said that business and profession are altogether completely different, and wherever the law wanted to give the benefit to both business as well as profession, it has always been clearly mentioned that this is available both to business as well as profession. In the present case, they have only said that this deduction is available to a professional. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. This deduction is available for the business, and hence this deduction can only be claimed under the business who are showing profits and gains from business. And unfortunately, as professional, a chartered accountant, lawyer, or a company secretary cannot claim deduction under 80JJAA of the Act. So it is not available to professionals.
So now the next issue, whether 80JJAA can be claimed by entity who is yet to commence operations, but it has recruited new employees. So basically section 80JJAA applies to a taxpayer whose gross total income includes income from business. However, issue may arise as to whether taxpayer can claim deduction under section 80JJAA if the unit undertaking in which new employees are recruited is yet to commence operation. Now, let's take so there are basically two scenarios, that taxpayer has only one business and the business has not started yet, or taxpayer has two separate businesses having distinct identity and the eligible business has not started yet. The second scenario is that taxpayer has existing running undertaking and it is in the process of setting new unit engaged in the same business. So now let's understand the first scenario where the taxpayer has no other business unit. So while we have gone through the provisions, as we understand that presence of positive profits and gains from business and profession is essential requirement for claiming deduction. Now, if the business head itself is not triggered because my business is not set up yet, my previous year has not commenced, therefore I cannot claim deduction under section 80JJAA because I am not having positive profits and gains from business and profession in that particular year. So that's why what conclusion flow is that taxpayer can claim deduction only when the business is set up and it has profits gains from business and profession. Similar position would be applicable in a case where there are two separate undertakings engaged in separate businesses and one of the business has not commenced. So JJAA eligible business has not commenced operations and though additional employees cost has been incurred. Now taking the second scenario where taxpayer has existing running unit and it is in the process of setting up a unit which is engaged in the same business. So let's say I am already engaged in chemical manufacturing and I am expanding my chemical manufacturing and setting up a new unit, let's say at some other place, whether I can claim deduction or not. So now once my business head is triggered, once I start generating profits and gains from business and profession, even though the unit which I am setting up has not started earning income, but my business and profession head is triggered. And since my head is triggered, I can claim this deduction, even though the 80JJAA unit has not started operations yet. Now coming to the next issue, this is very interesting issue and it is very, very much relevant since the preferred view is that the 80JJAA deduction is to be claimed qua business and not qua entity. So let's take a scenario where the eligible business has positive profits. So 80JJAA unit has a, let's say, profit of 100 rupees, but the other businesses has losses. So let's say ineligible business has losses of 150 rupees. So now profits of 80JJAA units are completely separate off against profit of ineligible unit. Though I have income from IFOS and my overall GTI remains positive, can I claim this deduction? So answer is yes, because 80JJAA deduction is linked through is not linked to any condition that it only provides one condition that GTI should be positive and profits and gains should be included in GTI. So once your gross total income includes profits and gains from business and profession, then you can claim deduction. So it is basically an expenditure linked deduction. Once you incur expenditure and fulfill all the conditions and you have positive gross total income which includes income from business and profession, you can claim this deduction. However, taking a reverse scenario where the eligible undertaking has, let's say, losses, but overall GTI is positive due to, let's say, profits in other business or IFOS. So in that scenario, here scenario 3, if you see, eligible business has negative profits, IFOS is 180, overall GTI is positive. Now, whether my GTI includes gains from business and profession? No. Entire business and profession loss is getting settled off against IFOS and my GTI comprises only of IFOS income. If you see the provisions, I'll just, change my slide and go through it. If you read subsection 1, it says that where gross total income of assessee to whom 44AB applies includes any profits and gains derived from business. So GTI should include profits and gains from business. In scenario 3, if you see, the GTI comprises only of IFOS and therefore I cannot claim deduction under section 80JJAA. So what is the conclusion flowing? That positive business income and positive GTI is mandatory. It does not make any difference in if profits of eligible business are settled off against losses. However, eligible business should have profit. No deduction would be available if there is loss in eligible business. Now coming to other issue. Consider a taxpayer who earns rental income. Whether such taxpayer can claim deduction under section 80JJAA. So in this case, there can be two scenarios. Scenario 1, rental income is assessed as business income. So if the property letting out is the main business of the entity, its memorandum of association states that its MO specifies that the entity will be involved in business of letting and then applying the ratio of Chennai properties if the rental income may qualify as business income, and therefore the taxpayer would be liable to tax audit under section 44AB if the turnover exceeds the specified limit, and therefore taxpayer can claim deduction under section 80JJAA. So therefore here the prima facie requirement is triggering the head business and profession having positive GTI. So once I trigger business and profession head, even though I'm earning rental income, I can claim deduction under section 80JJAA. Scenario 2, where the rental income is assessable as house property income. In that case, I'm not offering this income as business and profession income. I'm not liable for tax audit, and therefore, even though it forms part of GTI of my income, it is not derived from business, and therefore I cannot claim reduction under section 80JJAA. What is the applicability of 80JJAA in case of presumptive taxation provisions or special provisions, which are provided like tonnage tax scheme for life insurances, for and presumptive provisions such as 44BB, 44BBB for aircraft shipping. Now, see, as you all know, the prima facie condition for claiming this deduction is triggering business head, and assessee should be liable for tax audit. When I opt for presumptive taxation, I'm not liable for tax audit, and therefore 80JJAA benefits may not be applicable. Where the taxpayer is covered under presumptive taxation. So let's say I'm earning business from earning income from business and profession, but I don't opt for 44AD provision, 8%, 6% wala provision. And if I show my income less than 6%, less than 8% as may be applicable, I get my books of account audited, then I'm fulfilling the condition of getting my books audited. I have income from business and profession, and therefore I can claim deduction under 80JJAA. Even for some special provisions like tonnage tax scheme, life insurance companies, they are mandatorily required to get their books of account audited, and therefore once they get their book of account audited, 80JJAA deduction can be claimed even for such businesses. Now, this is a very important issue, which deals with whether 80JJAA is a standard deduction or it is a year-on-year deduction. So let's take an example here. So if you can see my screen and this table, let's say an employee was employed in year 1. His salary was say 30,000. In year 2, his salary became 43,000. So basically his total emoluments was 10,000 per month. He worked for 10 months in year 1 and is paid salary of 1 lakh. His salary increased to 12,000 in year 2, and therefore total emoluments would be 1,44,000, 12,000 into 12. And let's say salary was increased to 15,000 per month in year 3, and therefore his total emoluments was 1,80,000, that is 15,000 into 12. Now the issue arises is whether I can claim deduction of 10,000 for 3 years, or I can consider increased salary, say let's say 12,000 and 15,000 for year 2 and 3 respectively. So if I say that it is a standard deduction and has to be applied on the first year's salary, then I'll get deduction of 1 lakh, that is 10,000 into 10, 1 lakh into 30%, that is 30,000 in year 1, year 2 and year 3. If I say that it is a year-on-year deduction, therefore my deduction would be 30,000 in year 1, that is 1 lakh into 30%, 40,200 in year 2, which is 1,44,000 into 30%, and in year 3 I'll be eligible for 54,000 rupees of deduction, which is 1,80,000 into 30%.
So basically here in the example we have tried and shown that a same employee gets employed in year 1, he stays for year 2 and year 3 also, but in year 2 and 3 he gets an increment. So year 2 his salary is 12 and in year 3 salary is 15,000 per month. So whether the deduction gets fixed, if I become eligible in year 1, my total payment is 1 lakh, then it is 30, 30, 30 fixed, no change. Or in year 1, because I was paid 1 lakh, so 1 lakh ka 30%, so 30,000. The same employee was paid 1,44,000 in year 2. So 30% of 1,44,000 comes to 43,200. And the same employee was paid 1,80,000 in year 3. So 54,000. So whether standard deduction, once the amount gets freezed in year 1, year 2 and 3 follows the same amount, or the amount gets changed every year, year 1, year 2, year 3. But the condition is the same employee should be employed with the employer in all the 3 years.
Right. So let's have a look at few arguments which supports year-on-year deduction. So the first thing, if you if you see the section, it says that 30% of additional wages paid during the previous year would be allowed as deduction. Now 30% of eligible additional wages refers to the wages paid during previous year in which deduction is claimed. Now, if it is not that the additional wages are capable of being paid only in first year. So if that employee is employed in year 2 and year 3, what I'm paying to that employee in year 2 and year 3 will also qualify as my additional wages, and therefore my actual payment which I'm making in year 2 and year 3 should be considered for 80JJAA computation. Even now if you resort to alternate view that it is a standard deduction, then following unintended results may apply. So basically, if a person is employed with a huge salary in year 1, so let's say I employ a person at salary of 24,000, and now I'm paying a salary of 5,000 in year 2 and year 3. If I say that only year 1's salary should be considered, that is 24,000 into 12 into 30% for 3 years, then I'll get a higher deduction even though I'm paying a nominal salary in year 2 and year 3. Standard deduction may continue even if a person has left the employment. So if I say that I have incurred this additional wage in year 1, so I am paying it 24,000 in year 1, that additional wages I have incurred, section says that 30% of additional wages is allowable for 3 years. Now, once I have incurred additional wage, section simply says that that additional amount will be allowable over a period of 3 years. Then, even though employee leaves the organization, I will be eligible to claim that deduction if the alternate view is adopted. And as we all seen in this example, that standard deduction may also work out to be a lower figure if salary is increased in later years. So these were the few arguments which suppose that year-on-year deduction may be claimed. Now, view 2, which supports that standard deduction should be followed, standard deduction method should be followed. In this view, the first argument which taxpayer can claim is put forward is that the section merely refers that 30% deduction of additional wages paid by taxpayer in a previous year. Now, section makes it clear that once you make payment in year 1, that additional amount will be available over a period of 3 years, including the year of employment. And therefore, it can be said that once you have incurred that expenditure, simple and plain language of section says that amount you can claim as deduction even in year 2 and year 3, irrespective of the fact whether the employee is employed, whether the salary increases to extent that it exceeds 25,000 or not. And if you see the language of the section, it permits deduction only in respect of new employees. The employee can be considered new only in the first year. Now, if the employee cannot be said to be a new employee in year 2 or year 3, and hence wages paid in first year is the benchmark, and that should be considered even in the later years. So these are the few arguments which highlights the issue is prone to litigation, but however the preferred view and which may be considered is that year-on-year deduction should be claimed. You need to assess whether that employee is employed in year 2 and year 3, whether the salary of that employee in year 2 and year 3 is below the threshold of 25,000. All such conditions needs to be checked on year-on-year basis, and the deduction is to be claimed on year-on-year basis. So this is the preferred view for this specific issue. Now coming to the next issue, whether there needs to be increase in employment every year. So let's consider a case study here. So ICO, let's say there is an Indian company which recruits 100 new employees who qualify as additional employee in year 1, and ICO claims 80JJAA deduction in year 1. Now in year 2, let's say there is no increase in employee, either because no new employees are recruited or the new recruitments are restricted only to vacancies arising. So let's say there were 100 employees, 5 employees left. So the organization hired five more employees, and the closing number of employees was 100 only. Now, can ICO claim deduction in year 2 with respect to 100 employees recruited in year 1, despite there being no increase in employment in year 2? So this issue also has two views. The arguments in favor of view 1, which says that 80JJAA deduction is available in year 2 even if there is no increase in employment, are as under. First is that 80JJAA is a provision which encourages employment. The section should be read in a manner which advances the objective of the provision, and therefore if the objective was to provide deduction of additional employee cost, why the cost incurred in year 1 should depend on fate of recruitment made by that organization in year 2 and year 3. Once you incur additional cost in year 1, even if you don't employ new persons, why should the cost which organization has incurred in year 1 be disallowed? The second argument which a taxpayer may like to place is that once the conditions are fulfilled, the deduction is available for 3 years, and therefore I can claim this deduction even though I do not increase my employment, because I have fulfilled my conditions, all the conditions year 1. I have incurred this cost, and therefore I should be allowable as deduction. Even if you read the explanatory memorandum to Finance Bill 2016 and CBDT circular, it clearly clarifies that the amended provision has done away with the requirement of the increase, the threshold test, that there should be 10% increase in number of employees every year, so any increase in employees will be eligible for deduction under new provision. And this can be interpreted in a manner to mean that new provisions do not require increase every year. Once you increase in year 1, you incur cost, you can claim deduction. Now view 2, which favors the argument that despite of there being recruitment in year 1 and no increase in employment, you are not available, 80JJAA cannot be claimed. So basically the first argument, if you see here, the fiction in proviso to explanation 1 specifies that additional employee cost will be nil if there is no increase in number of employees. So I'll just take you through that provision. Additional employee cost, which is defined here, that provided that in case of existing business, the additional employee cost will be nil. So section itself says that the additional employee cost for that particular year will be considered as nil if there is no increase in number of employees from the total number of employees as on the last day of previous year. I am allowed deduction on 30% of the additional employee cost which I incur. Now, when I am not increasing the number of employees, my additional employee cost would be nil, and therefore I can claim deduction of nil into 30% for that year, and therefore I may not be allowed any deduction in year 2. Now, if you see the other condition in explanation 1, which states that the emoluments are required to be paid by account pay check or bank draft. So this condition is also needs to be checked on year basis. So every year the emoluments needs to be paid by account pay check. Now, if you read this condition as year condition, then even the subclause A, which states that if there is no increase, then your additional cost shall be nil, has to be seen on year basis. You cannot read this as an independent one-time provision. Now, considering both the views, arguments which are included in both the views, the preferred view for this specific issue is that JJAA deduction would be available only if there is increase in employees. So let's say if I do not increase my number of employees, I will not be available deduction for employee cost which I have incurred even in year 1. So let's say in year 1 I have incurred expense of 1 lakh for this employee. Now in year 2, if there is no increase in employees, I will not be allowable this 1 lakh of deduction. If in year 3, if I again increase my employee strength, I will be allowed in year 3. So all these issues are very important, which are particular to 80JJAA. the drafting is not done in a clear which may not specify and is prone to two views, and therefore practically view 2 is a better view for this particular issue and needs to be considered. The next issue, whether the calculation of number of employees should be on a gross basis or on a net basis. So if you read the provision, it clearly says that additional employee requires inclusion of only those employees which have effect of increasing the total number of employees on the last day of preceding year. So let's say the total employees was 200 at the beginning of the year. 10 employees left the organization, and therefore the employees which were remaining at the closing was 190. This does not have effect of increasing the total number of employees. But in this case, if let's say I employ 11 employees, then I have effect of increasing the employee by 1. So 200 minus 10 plus 11 comes to 201. My opening was 200, closing is 201. That is effect of increasing the total number of employees, and therefore I can claim deduction. And so the prevalent view is that the number of employees is to be considered on a net basis after deducting the employees who have left the organization in that particular year. Now, very important issue. You may have seen in various MNCs, various groups, that a particular employee is on payroll of 2 entities. So let's say X Limited and Y Limited are 2 entities of the same group. Mr. X is employed by X Limited and he is also employed by Y Limited. Then in case of dual employment, whether X Limited can claim deduction or whether Y Limited can claim deduction, or whether both X Limited and Y Limited can claim deduction. So our thoughts in this, basically in this particular issue, would be that 80JJAA is available if you satisfy those conditions. Once you satisfy your employee test, your salary test, all those tests, just that your employee was employed at 2 organizations would not restrict that particular organization from claiming 80JJAA deduction. So let's say X Limited is incurring 24,000 on Mr. X, Y Limited is incurring 24,000 on Mr. X. Both X Limited and Y Limited should be allowed deduction under section 80JJAA. However, it has to be borne in mind that the arrangement should be bona fide. Just for claiming 80JJAA deduction, you cannot split cost of employees in two entities. So appropriate documentation would need to be made that why X Limited and Y Limited employed Mr. X at a separate payroll, and why X Limited itself has not employed Mr. X. Why dual employment was made for Mr. X. So that needs to be justified through sufficient documentation. Now consider a case where I employ a person with a salary of 24,000. I promise him that I'll increase your salary to 65,000 after 3 years. Whether it can be said that I have promised to increase salary to 65,000 after 3 years, I am just paying him 24,000 right now because I want to claim this 80JJAA card deduction. So in this particular issue, I am satisfying if I'm satisfying the threshold test in year 1, year 2, and year 3, I can claim deduction for this years. A promise to pay cannot be considered as salary until it becomes actually payable. Promise to pay, if I promise to pay him 65,000 in year 4, then he would be eligible in year 4 only. It cannot be said that 65,000 should be included in year 1, year 2, and year 3 ka salary. However, any tax abusive arrangement would be subject to GAR, and therefore appropriate documentation would be required for this purpose. Coming to the next issue, so let's consider a scenario where employee qualifies as additional employee in year 1. However, he resigns and is recruited in year 2 again. Whether in year 2 such employee will qualify as additional employee, same employee. So this issue is also prone to two views. The first view is that employee recruited again should qualify as additional employee. So basically, arguments in favor of this view are as under. So the first argument is that employer has no control over employee. So if I want to leave a particular organization, I can leave that organization. And if I try my luck at other organization, if I'm not satisfied at other organization, I'll rejoin my first organization. Employer has no control over employees. Also, if the same employee comes back, I'll save my training cost, I'll save my other cost. So basically, employer has no control over employees, and therefore, if the same employee is recruited again, he should be eligible for deduction. Even if you see the section, it nowhere specifies that re-employment is not eligible. So re-employment is not a re-employment of specific employee would not be allowed as a deduction. It only says that new employee would qualify as deduction. Re-employment of employee will also qualify as a deduction. View 2, which says that employee recruited again should not qualify as deduction. Basically, tax authorities may contain that section only applies to employees who are newly recruited. If a person is recruited again, he may not be considered as a new recruit, and therefore deduction may be denied by tax authorities, and proper records would need to be maintained to substantiate that the employment is genuine and it is not being resorted to claim benefit under this section. We specifically believe that since there is no provision under 80JJAA which denies re-employment of employee, and therefore even employee who is recruited again should qualify as cost incurred for such employee should qualify as additional employee cost and deduction under 80JJAA. Now let's have a look at a very important example, and this was basically clarified by Finance Act 2018. So Finance Act 2018 inserted this proviso where it says that where an employee is employed during previous year for less than 240 days. So the example which Shalibhadra gave, if the employee is recruited after 4th August and he's employed and he continues in his employment in year 2. So he completes less than 180 days in year 1, but he completes 240 days or more in year 2, he'll be deemed to be employee in year 2, and therefore deduction under section 80JJAA can be claimed in year 2, year 3 and year 4 for that particular employee. Now the other condition which is specified in 80JJAA is that whether employee should participate in PF fund. Now so is it mandatory that employee should participate in PF, or whether employee who is not participating in provident fund scheme may be allowed as deduction. So if you read clause D of explanation 2 of 80JJAA, it clearly provides that employee who does not participate in recognized provident fund shall not be considered as additional employee, and therefore deduction of 80JJAA would be available only to those employees who qualify as additional employee, and for qualifying as additional employee, that employee should participate in statutory PF scheme, and therefore it is mandatory for claiming deduction that employee participates in a recognized PF scheme. Now this is also a very important issue which needs to be considered. So if you consider a case where employee is getting, let's say, 24,000 of basic salary, employer is contributing 3,000 towards PF ESIC, and employer is also contributing 3,000 towards some non-statutory fund, let's say to some workers welfare fund which is created for the association of workers, which is not a statutory fund. What needs to be considered in determining the total emoluments which are paid to the employees? I'll just go through the go through the provision which specifies which defines emoluments. So if you read here, emoluments means any sum payable to an employee in lieu of his employment by whatever name called. So it says that any sum which is paid or payable to employee, but does not include. So there are specific exclusions provided in the definition itself. Apart from these exclusions, any sum which is paid to employee will be considered as emoluments. What are the exclusions? Recognition, contribution to PF, provident fund, pension fund, or any other statutory funds. Now, when I'm contributing to non-statutory funds, let's say for workers' welfare fund, it will be covered under the definition of emoluments because it says any sum which is paid to employee, and therefore this particular employee to whom I'm paying 24,000 plus 3,000 PF and plus 3,000 towards workers' welfare fund may not qualify as additional employee because his total emolument would be 27,000. But in a scenario when I'm paying him only 24,000 and plus 3,000 towards recognized PF ESIC, which is a statutory fund, then this employee would be qualified because the emoluments would include only 24,000 and not this 3,000, which is specifically excluded. Now, important issue, whether payment of advance salary which exceeds threshold of 25,000 needs to be considered. Now, if you see the nature of advance salary, it is basically sum paid in advance to an employee for which the employee will render services in future. If the employee leaves organization midway, he will have to repay this advance salary. So this salary which is paid in advance cannot be said as paid or payable because his obligation to render services is still pending. And therefore, when I'm paying advance salary, even it exceeds 25,000, it will not be considered in this 25,000 threshold. Now, an important issue, whether exempt or non-taxable elements of salary needs to be included while computing emoluments for the purpose of 80JJAA. So let's say the exempt perquisites like telephone reimbursement, conveyance allowance, which are exempt, would be considered while computing this 25,000 threshold. As we read earlier, the definition clearly clarifies that emolument means any sum paid to employee but does not include following. And therefore, even though this payment is not non-taxable in the hands of employee, but it needs to be considered in the while computing the emoluments, since the definition specifically states that any sum which is paid to employee, and therefore even non-taxable elements of salary would need to be included in computation of emoluments. Now coming to an important interplay of 35 AD and 80JJAA. So whether 35 AD and 80JJAA can be claimed simultaneously by a taxpayer, even this issue is prone to two views. Basically, if you see view 1, it says that deduction under section 85 is a JJ and 35 AD cannot be claimed simultaneously. The arguments in favor of this view are that subsection 7 of 80A provides that in case deduction is claimed under chapter 6A part C, no deduction shall be allowed under section 35 AD. So 80A, which governs the scope of chapter 6A deduction, specify that if any deduction is claimed under chapter 6A, 35 AD deduction will not be allowed. 35 AD says that if 35 AD deduction is claimed, then chapter 6A ka deduction will not be allowed. So there is referencing of 80A to 35 AD and 35 AD to 80A, which says that you cannot claim both the deduction. If you come to view 2, it says that basically the intention, if you see, is to prevent assessee from claiming double deduction from the profits of single undertaking. So if I'm claiming deduction of ₹100 from particular undertaking in a particular section, let's say 35 AD, I cannot claim again profits of that undertaking under section 80I because I am claiming profits of same undertaking twice. But if you see 80JJAA, it is basically a expenditure linked deduction. Here I am not claiming any profits of undertaking as a deduction, rather I am getting my expenditure as a deduction in year 1, year 2 and year 3, and therefore the provisions of ATA 7 which says that profits cannot be claimed twice. I am fulfilling that condition because I'm not claiming profits. I'm claiming expenditure, and therefore 80JJAA deduction should be available. So here we would believe that issue may be subject to litigation, but view 2 that 80JJAA can be claimed simultaneously is a preferred view. Now, what is interplay of section 80JJAA and MAT? It is very clear that while computing book profits, you don't get 80JJAA ka deduction, and therefore it is an independent section. It is an independent provision incorporated under normal provisions of the Act and not MAT provisions. And therefore, if your profits under normal provisions are lower than MAT, since you are claiming 80JJAA ka deduction, and so you would be liable to pay taxes under MAT. It's not that you will claim deduction under section 80JJAA under MAT as well. And one more issue, whether you can claim 80IA or similar deduction as well as section 80JJAA ka deduction simultaneously. As we all know, 80IA is not applicable from 1st April for entities who are commencing operations on or after 1st April 2017. But all those SECs who are already claiming this 80IA deduction, whether they can claim 80JJAA ka deduction as well. So if you read the text of 80A4, it says that notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in section 10A, 10AA, 10B, 10BA, or any provisions of this chapter. This chapter means chapter 6A. Under heading C, deductions in respect of certain incomes, where in case of assessee, any amount of profits and gains of undertaking or unit. It refers that you should be claiming deduction of any profits or gains of undertaking or eligible business. You are claiming deduction. Then you won't get profits and gains of same undertaking as a deduction under any other provisions of the Act. So if you interpret this section, you will come to a conclusion that limitations is applicable only when profits and gains are being claimed twice. As we discussed, 80JJAA is an expenditure linked deduction. It is not linked with profits of that particular undertaking, and therefore preferred view may be that 80JJAA and 80IA can be claimed simultaneously. Now going through some procedural requirements for claiming deduction in section 80JJAA.
So as I mentioned in the initial and the reading of the section, accountant's report, that is form number 10DA, is mandatory to be filed for claiming the deduction under 80JJAA. It's a chartered accountant report, and chartered accountant has to certify that what is the amount of deduction under 80JJAA of the Act. This form is to be digitally signed and to be filed before the specified date, which is actually 1 month prior to due date of filing of return. And so you can say 1 month, so it's a tax audit date, and ultimately the amount also needs to be mentioned in the tax audit report. What is your claim of 80JJAA? So this form would need to be filed prior to tax audit, and also this amount would need to be mentioned in tax audit report. Lastly, coming on the transitional provision of 80JJAA. So as I mentioned earlier, that this liberalized amendment was brought in by Finance Act 2016. So for an SSE who qualified in financial year 15-16, and so whether he can continue to claim the provisions of 80JJAA for the residuary period, the answer is yes. He is qualified and he can claim the deduction. So this is the form 10DA summary of recent changes. So the erstwhile 10DA was a very short form which only included that what is the number of employees and what is the amount of eligible deduction. But it was not giving any bifurcation of, let's say an FCC was claiming 10DA, so claiming 80JJAA, and it was year 3. Then the form was not giving any bifurcation of the amount of deduction claimed in year 3, but pertain to year 2 and year 1. It only mentioned what is the amount of deduction, and hence there was slight confusion that what amount needs to be mentioned. Do I need to mention total amount and put a note that out of this total amount, this much amount pertains to year 1, this much amount pertains to year 2, and this much amount pertains to year 3. So now the new form that was notified by notification number 104 of 2019 by December 19. So EY 2021 was the first year when this new form 10DA was notified. So changes were made in form 10DA. It gave a bifurcation that what amount of deduction you are claiming in this year, what amount of deduction you are claiming in this year but pertained to the preceding year, and what amount of the deduction you are claiming in this year but it pertains to the year preceding the preceding year. So year 1, 2, and 3. So this has been brought under the new form. Plus the new form has also brought the details of where we can mention the number of employees who didn't complete number of days in year 1, but they completed 240 days in year 2, and hence we claimed their deduction as new employees in year 2, 3, and 4. So these are the broad changes that have been brought under the new form. Again, the new form, because this section is not just for the company, it is for the individual who has business and needs to get its accounts tax audited. It is for the partnership, it is for the LLP. So keeping in mind the individual, they have also brought in that you can also mention the Aadhaar of the individual if that it's a proprietary concern. So this is more on the changes that have been brought under the form 10DA. So this is all from our side. I hope this analysis will help us better evaluate the claim of deduction for our clients. And if we are able to bring this value to the client, then client will also appreciate that they have been able to get a more deduction leading to a lower tax, especially for the expenditure that they have already incurred. And there is no additional investment that they need to make for claiming this expenditure. This deduction is itself available for the expenditure that is already incurred. So I hope this will help us evaluate the claim of deduction better, and we are able to provide that benefit to the client. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chawda sir. We are done with our presentation. Any questions from anybody? Happy to take it up. Chawda sir, any questions from anybody? We are happy to take it up.
સાહેબ આપણે પેલું ડ્રોપ બોક્સ જોઈ લઈએ જરીક બોક્સમાં કોઈ હોય તો કદાચ.
Sure, sure.
If there is any query. Chat box માં તો I think there is no chat.
Now, if there is any query to anybody at a later date also, anytime we can connect, they can connect with me and we are happy to take that up.
Any member friends, any query, any question? Sir, please share me your this presentation.
Sure, sir, sure. We'll send it.
Yeah. Chintan bhai. Sir, I am just calling Chintan bhai for just making vote of thanks. Give me 1 minute.
Sure.
હાલ જેમ કરીએ પેટ્રોલ પંપ છે. સિદ્ધાંત સાથે કામ
Yes, sir. Laddaji,
Friends, I'm
please,
audible.
yes, please deliver vote of thanks to Shalibhadra ji.
One of the most difficult subject matter in the direct tax to get the rebate and benefits under this law. So thank you very much, Shivendra sir. And we always have that privilege that anytime in emergency or otherwise also it is planned or not planned, so we'll take benefit of the knowledge. Thank you very much from the circle, Gandhinagar circle and CP circle. And we are expecting that such type of seminar will continue from your side.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much,
sir.
Mukesh bhai. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, please,
I
sir.
hope I have delivered the justice. I have given the justice to the topic and happy to present any other session also anytime. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Definitely, sir.
Thank you,
sir.
please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Avjo.
Yes, yes. See you, sir.
Avjo. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
તો વગર વેચવાનું. કોકના લગ્ન મોકલેલા જો તો મહિના